the candor, your candor. I think it's very, very important that we confront the reality of the situation we're in. And if some of you have known me, and I'm sure you have for a long time, you know, I've spoken out again and again about the ego massaging approach to history. And in fact, I think maybe about the first times it might have been at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And it's understandable why we want to massage our egos and to lift ourselves up and to feel good about ourselves, and that should be done. However, it is very important, too, that we look at the reality of the situation we are in, or else we can come blinded by our attempt to maintain ourselves with just good feelings and great feelings. And that can be just as harmful, you see, as not knowing the truth as well. We have to tell both sides of the truth. I heard you had a little thing here the last time here with Brother Coakley. I never quite got the story. I haven't had a chance to really meet Coakley, and I've heard his tapes. I have, frankly, no major problem with Mr. Coakley, and I wished him well. And I'm sure if we were to meet him today, we would get along quite well. I have no problems with Steve Coakley. He happened to hear an address, not an address, but a radio program I was on in D.C. I gather it might have been he that called and asked the question. And I hear sometimes he calls in disguise. But I want to clarify my situation, which is, of course, I think you're pretty much familiar with. But my critique of the conspiracy approach is very well known. Some of you, if you are not aware of it, I'm sure Brother Yusuf has probably the tape that I did at Harriet Tubman around the time when we were dealing with the issue of violence. Yeah, the violence initiative. Yeah. And I've stated it in other places as well as I did on the radio, so it's so my concerns about conspiracy approaches to history have been quite public and quite clear. I have no problem with us determining what conspiracies exist. And obviously there are conspiracies, and it's very important that we know those conspiracies. However, I do advocate that we cannot spend all of our energy into just trying to root them out, that there's much more work to be done than the mere discovery of conspiracies. Just as I have just got through saying about history. While we use our history to uplift ourselves, to uplift our esteem, to bring truth to ourselves, to transform ourselves, we must not get addicted to this. We must also look at the realities that confront us as people. And while we look at the conspiracies against us as a people, we must not also get addicted to just digging up conspiracies. As I have warned before, by the time you find out the conspiracy and who's behind it, it's too late. It's too late. It's too late. And it takes more than knowing about it to defend yourself against it. And you really don't have to know about it, frankly speaking. If you're only going to learn about conspiracy and then react, you remain in the same mode of action that we are in today, reactionary. Our orientation toward the world today as African people must be pro-actionary. Our ability to defend ourselves must occur before the fact. Our programs to liberate ourselves and to defend our liberation, to enhance our quality of life, to overthrow white supremacy must go on regardless as to what other people are doing. Whether they're plotting or scheming or not, it does not really matter. I will assume that whites are scheming. I will assume that there are black boulets. There's no problem with that. But my thing is what? We must build an African global system that will secure us against black boulets, white conspiracy, or any other ethnic group or conspiracy in the world. This is a positive approach. And so consequently then, we have to watch out then when we just get one-sided in issues and recognize we have to bring balance to ourselves in the world. You also have to be careful when you get into conspiracy theory, and that's good, and discovering conspiracies. Conspiracies have a way of seducing you and seducing audiences and creating pressures. And ultimately, if you don't watch it, when you get an audience caught up looking for a new something coming out from under the rock, and you build an image based on that, now in every lecture you got to bring out, you know, some new piece. Sometimes the conspiracy starts happening before they start happening. You see, you start beginning to be a bit creative. And you can start, if you don't watch out, to feed on yourself. You see, because if you get built up in that kind of thing as a lecturer, and you get attached to an audience that way, and you know an audience is looking for this, then you start looking for enemies and people. And then you start naming people, and you start feeding the monster, you see. And after a while, you'll feed one person after another, and after a while, the community itself will eat on itself and feed on itself and destroy itself, you see. So we have to be very, very careful. There's nothing wrong with studying conspiracies. There's nothing wrong with studying other people's organizations. In the series I'm doing on power, that is exactly what I do. Much of the stuff that Brother Coakley deals with is dealt with as a part of my power series. Much of the information is public, actually. It's not really hidden and secret. If you have an interest in it, and that's your orientation, you can literally find it almost anywhere you want to.
That's right.
The important part, though, is just not naming it and pointing it out. At some point, it must be translated into a plan of action. It must become a part of the organization of the African American community. The understanding of how these other groups are working and other organizations must ultimately be built in to how we will design our organizations, how we will organize ourselves, how we then will use the strength that we already have to counter these organizations. The studies of these other organizations and so forth becomes a study in preparation for strategy, not just for naming, not just for passing on gossip, not just titillating people, but if this is the structure of the conspiracy against us, then the next issue becomes what should be our strategy to remove this conspiracy, and what tactics should we use to destroy this conspiracy, given its design and its approach. But to merely point it out, to merely expose, and just leave it at that, really creates a problem. And ultimately, it can work against you. You can leave from one of those kind of lectures where, you know, you find out all the inside dope, feeling morally superior to those people who are conspiring against you and how dirty and low down and, you know, all that they are. But you would not be any better off in defending yourself against them. You will not in any way have developed further steps for strengthening yourself to defend yourself against them. So, Persons like Coakley have an important role to play in our community by exposing certain things and situations, but we must all be cautious and recognize that that is only a part of the struggle, that this now must be integrated into other aspects of our development as people, that we must not just come into these kind of lectures to feel morally superior to another people and so forth, but we must actually use this information proactively. There will always be those within our ranks who will operate against our interests. There's nothing new about this. It's been going on for hundreds of years. It will go on in the future. And we must discover them when we can. But we must also be in a position to neutralize them as well, not just to name them and let it go at that, leaving them in their same positions and place. That requires another level of organization. And it's that level of organization that I'm concerned about. Some of you are wondering about my power series that I've mentioned. And in that series, we talk about the think tanks and the other things as well. I am at the last lecture in terms of writing for that series. And when I do finish that last lecture, then the series will start. It was designed for 10 lectures. I've written 9 of the lectures, and I'm getting ready to write the 10th. Of course, I've fallen right in the middle of our Black history celebrations and African history celebrations. And this has retarded my capacity to sit down and complete the history, complete the final lecture. And there's a great deal of information too, and I have to really grade that information because I have to abstract a good deal of it. I cannot include everything in it. When I complete that lecture, then we will get started with the power series. I decided, in the light of my past history, that it would probably be better to write the lectures first before they're given, rather than trying to transcribe them from lectures such as this from the tape. It takes a tremendous amount of work to try to transcribe a tape, because when you do an oral presentation, you do so many things. And yet, when you look at it on a written page, you cannot just take a lecture, an oral lecture, and print it and put it out. It just doesn't work that way, because you pick up my tone, you pick up my facial features, you pick up a lot of things as you hear me talk that you will not pick up if the things are written on the page. So consequently, even when you republish a lecture, you find yourself doing a tremendous amount of editing, a tremendous amount of changing grammar. You know, so I'll stop in mid-sentence here, do other kind of things. I'll stop at a thought 1 minute and I go on 5 minutes about something else and then come back. In a written situation, that creates tremendous problems. So instead of lecturing and then trying to pull it off from the lecture, I decided what I'd do would I'd write the lectures first, and then we would present the lectures. And actually, the written material will be even broader than the lecture itself. And it's very important that the written material gets out. We are a very oral people. A good deal of our information is gained through hearing. But we have to face the fact now that we are in a so-called literate culture, and we are in an electronic age. And while we may honor our griots and we may honor the oral mode, we must also face the reality that that mode is not all we need to make it in this world. We cannot continue just to subsist on lectures alone. We must do a great deal more writing and a great deal more reading. And we must become much more involved in publishing information and in communicating information. There is no way I can communicate to you many of the things I would like to through speaking to you. It's not possible. I can't quote the references and go into kind of detail and the other stuff that you really need if you're going to really about work. You see, the most we can do here is give a bit of the information and motivate to a great degree. But in terms of a working knowledge, in terms of something that you can go back to again and again, in terms of the capacity to follow up references and so forth, you can't do that. And you know, I've tried so much. And that's one of the reasons why I've gone on for 3 hours or 4 hours sometimes, because you're trying to, put it all in. You see, but no, you're going to have to read, and you're going to have to read a lot. We're going to have to change our mode a bit. While we honor our oral traditions, we also have a literal tradition as African people as well. We are the first people of the word, the written word. So there's no reason why then we should perceive ourselves as only people who are caught up in the spoken word. We must recapture that word. And I'll tell you another thing this evening as well. We must publish more as people. It's very, very important that we do that. We don't have enough information out here. That's very important, and we need solid information out here. We as a people must read also beyond our African-centered books. Some people are getting caught up in reading black-only books, or books written only by black authors. I warn you, that can limit your perception. We're writing as much as we can. Other people are writing as much as they can. But frankly speaking, the number of African-centered books written by African authors is still very narrow in terms of the kind of knowledge and information we need to have as a people. And consequently, then, we must integrate a lot of other knowledge from a lot of other sources into an African-centered program. I am concerned with Africanizing information. You can get information from anywhere and any place and anybody. It's not the source of the information that is of major importance. It is the question that you have in mind and the intentionality that you have in mind when you contact that information that is of importance. When you come with certain African-centered questions and certain African-centered intentions, you can subvert the intentions of other people. And even though they may have written lies, they may have written a book to falsify your image, with an African-centered question in your mind, and an African-centered intentionality in your mind, you can still gain useful information from that. And you can turn then their intentions into something that works for you. So you just can't say, well, because it's written by a white man, I'm not going to read it. Or because, well, it's lying and they're intended to do. No, the fact that you know it's a lie is information. Now, why is it a lie? What is the end point of the lie? What is trying to be accomplished there? What is the technique of the lie? How is this hooked into propaganda? In what way is this group trying to transform my consciousness? What techniques and methods can I get from this to use against my enemies? What are their methods and techniques of propaganda that I can use to advance the propaganda for African people? Because see, our propaganda is not necessarily lies either, you know. And propaganda is not necessarily a negative term. Propaganda comes from the basic word to propagate, to move information, to communicate information, to persuade. And the methods of moving information and communicating information and of persuading people is not a science of Europeans only. not by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, when you study the oral tradition, you'll find that that tradition is very much grounded in persuasion. And is very much about persuasion. So then, hang in, you will hear about the announcement of the power conferences. And some of you, I think, have had some questions